distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you all for joining us tonight to welcome our honored guest, the Honorable Tom Malinowski, the Assistant Secretary of the State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. With him tonight are Deputy Assistant Secretary Scott Busby and Ryan Fiorisi, the officer of the Office of East Asian and Pacific Affairs, Department DRL. Please give them a big hand. The Honorable Malinowski was sworn in as Assistant Secretary for Democracy, Human Rights and Labor on December 3rd, 2014. Prior to that, from 2001, he was the Washington Director of the Human Rights Watch, and from 1998 to 2001, he served as the Senior Director for the National Security Council at the White House. Secretary Malinowski has devoted his life to promoting democracy and protecting human rights all over the world, including Vietnam. In that spirit, 3 weeks ago, he led a delegation, the U.S. delegation, to Hanoi for the bilateral U.S.-Vietnam Human Rights Dialogue. And Secretary Malinowski is willing to meet with us tonight to share with us the his first-hand result of the dialogue, as well as to exchange with us, to discuss with us the issues of mutual concern. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Assistant Secretary of the State for Human Rights, Democracy and Labor, the Honorable Tom Malinowski.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight, for spending the evening here with us. Thank you, Dr. Quan, for organizing this event, for inviting so many close friends, for giving us a chance to meet you all, and for all of the work you have done as an advocate for human rights in Vietnam for all of these years. You do not let us forget about these issues. And one reason we work so hard, one reason we try so hard, is because you do not let us forget. And so thank you for that. It's a wonderful opportunity to meet all of you and to have this chance to talk to you about what we are doing right now in support of this goal of human rights and democracy in Vietnam, and to have a chance to answer some of the questions that I know that you have. I'm going to say a few words. I'm going to tell you about our trip to Vietnam. I'm going to tell you about our strategy, our thinking right now, but then we're going to have a chance to just talk, and I'm sure that you will have some questions. I will do my very best to answer them. Let me say this at the beginning. My job is to promote human rights all over the world. So you can imagine what my days are like. I'm not spending all my time just thinking about Vietnam. I think about Afghanistan and Iraq and China and Russia and Ukraine and Burundi this week and Sudan and Egypt and so on and so on and so on and so on. And many of these places are full of very painful problems. And in some places, we try to stand up for this cause, but frankly, it is very frustrating. And there are some days when we have very little hope. We push anyway because it's the right thing to do. But it's hard to see how things can get better, at least this year or next year. And so we push and we push, hoping that maybe in 5 years or 10 years, we can get to a point where we have an opportunity for change. But with Vietnam, we feel like we've reached that kind of opportunity. And I stress opportunity, not reality. We have been working at this for many, many years. Many of you, most of you, far longer than I have. My first trip to Vietnam, as I was telling Dr. Quan, was in the year 2000 when I was working with President Clinton. Very different time in our relationship, the very beginning of the opening between the United States and Vietnam. But we feel like we're at a point, this year especially, where we have some chances. And because of that, we have a real spotlight on human rights in Vietnam. Everybody I work with, the administration, from Secretary Kerry to my other colleagues in the State Department, to, of course, our U.S. Trade Representative's office because of the TPP debate, to the White House, to the President, right now is focused on how to seize this opportunity. And it is partly because of TPP, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that with you shortly. It is partly because of all the other things that the government of Vietnam wants from the United States right now. It's because of the geopolitics. Perhaps it's simply because of the relationship reaching a point of maturity. It's certainly because of all the changes happening within Vietnamese society and the demands that are coming from the bottom up in that society. But the bottom line is, we feel we have the best opportunity that we have had in a very, very long time, and we need to seize it. Now, as I said, as Dr. Quan said, I was just in Vietnam, and officially this was for the U.S.-Vietnam Human Rights Dialogue. Now, we use this dialogue to do a lot of other things. We use it as an opportunity to talk to the government, which we did. We had a whole day of meetings where we sat down with officials from all the different parts of the Vietnamese government. We talked about rule of law and legal reform. We talked about freedom of expression. We talked about labor rights. We talked about religious freedom, all of the issues that are of concern. We also had separate bilateral meetings, one-on-one meetings with senior government officials to talk about those issues. We had a full day of intensive meetings with members of civil society in Vietnam, with human rights activists, with labor rights activists, with people from think tanks who are working on these issues. It was interesting. Usually they stop people from coming to meet us. This time they did not stop people from coming to meet us, which is a first, at least in my experience. We then went up to the Northwest Highlands, where we met with local leaders of the minority and religious communities there, visited Catholic churches, Protestant churches, Buddhist temple that was newly built in Lao Cai. We had a little bit of fun. I took a group of people to climb up Mount Fansipan, which I'm proud to say we did in one day. Normally it takes two. Ryan chickened out. He can't keep up with me. We also visited a prison and met with a couple of the prisoners of conscience who were trying to get out of prison. Father Lee was one of them. And spoke to the press. You may have seen some of the public comments that we made. Now, what are we focused on in these meetings? I'll tell you the substance, and then I'll talk a little bit about the politics. First of all, the big point that we make to the Vietnamese government is you want a relationship with the United States. You want a comprehensive partnership with the United States. That's what they say. And our answer to that is, you can have one, and we want one too. But you need to understand that we don't have deep, comprehensive, enduring, real partnerships with countries unless there is a common foundation of shared values. We have that kind of relationship with Japan. We have it with France. We have it with Germany. We have it with South Korea. And we could have that kind of relationship with Vietnam. But there has to be a common foundation of shared values. We cannot just be against the same things. We can't just be against, for example, China taking islands in the South China Sea. Because if we're just against the same things, that's not going to last. We have to be for the same things, because that's what lasts. If we're for the same things, and this is not just what I'm saying to you, this is what we say to them. If we are for the same things, then we can survive disagreements. Because, you know, we disagree with England all the time about one thing or another. We have all kinds of arguments with Japan about trade, about different issues. But it doesn't matter because we have that foundation. We are for the same things. And I have to tell you, when I make that argument to them, they listen. Because I think deep down, there are many people in the Vietnamese government now who are thinking about the benefits of that kind of relationship with the United States. But they know what they have to do. And that message is not coming just from me, the person who has human rights in his title. It is coming from President Obama, from Secretary Kerry, from members of Congress who are visiting now every month to Vietnam. So they know, they believe it. So that's the big message. In terms of the specific issues, as you well know, we want to make sure that there are no more prisoners of conscience in Vietnam. Nobody should be imprisoned for peaceful activism, peaceful criticism, peaceful labor organizing, peaceful religious worship, peaceful anything. And we have been working down a list of people, and there are still too many people on that list, although there are fewer today than there were a year ago. I've also told them, I don't want to argue with you about lists for too much longer. I don't want to argue with you about individual people who are in prison. And so the way to get past these arguments is legal reform. And they have said to us and to their own people that their goal is to reform the domestic laws so that they are consistent with Vietnam's new constitution and with international standards. What does that mean? We're going to have to see. And I don't expect it to mean that in the next year or two, Vietnam is going to turn into a democracy. But they have at least made a commitment that we can remind them of, that we can take to the bank. If you mean this, then you have to reform your penal code, which allows you to imprison basically anybody who criticizes Communist Party rule in Vietnam. If you want to arrest them, you can under your law. And so they say, okay, well, we're going to have to reform that. Do they agree with us on exactly how they should reform it? No. But they agree that we should have input, which is a breakthrough. They will share drafts with us. They will take our comments. We will have a discussion back and forth. I think we have an opportunity to make it better step by step. They have to have a new demonstrations law. They have to have a new law on civil society organizations. They have to have a new labor law. We'll talk about that in a second. So this is something that they have to do as part of this process. So that's what we talk about in all of these meetings. And what have we been able to achieve? First of all, I think, and I mentioned this, I think there has been a change, and the most important change has come from within Vietnamese society itself. You all know this. You have tens of millions of people in Vietnam who are on Facebook, and they are speaking freely every single day. There's nothing the government can do about that. You have a lot of Vietnamese workers who are associating freely. They don't have freedom of association, but they are associating freely in their factories, in their workplaces. There's very little the government can do to change that. There are these demands that are coming from the bottom up. And there's a debate in the country about what its future should be. What kind of political system should we have? What should be the relationship between the government and the society? And that debate, which is starting at the grassroots, is seeping up into the higher levels. And here is where the politics comes in. The people who are willing to argue for change are not going to win the argument simply by saying, you know, it's the right thing to do. We really shouldn't have all these political prisoners. We'd be better off if we had a more open society. Some of them believe that, and I think there are even people in the Communist Party who believe that Vietnam would be better off if it were a more open society. But they are not going to win the argument simply by saying it's the right thing to do. So the argument they are using, frankly, is that this change is necessary to get what we want from the United States, including, right now, most important, TPP. And this is where we have to think about what our choice ought to be. Now, as I've looked at this, in the last 6 months in particular, the last year, especially the last 6 months, because of our debate in the United States about TPP and other decisions we have to make to improve or not to improve this relationship, there has been this spotlight on human rights in Vietnam. They know that they are being watched very, very carefully. And what has happened in this period? They've signed the Convention Against Torture, and they've promised to change their domestic law to implement the convention. They have released some prisoners, not all the ones that we want, but some, including some prominent ones like Du Kai. And many of you may have noticed that we invited him to the White House recently so that he could not just meet with President Obama, but interview President Obama, because we want to respect him as a journalist. You get an interview. There has been greater restraint by our dear friends at the Ministry of Public Security, who I've gotten to know fairly well in the last few months. They don't like it, but the fact is, 2 years ago, we had about 61 people in Vietnam convicted for peaceful political activity. And this year, some people think the number is 0. Some people have told us, no, maybe it's 2 or 3. We're looking at that very carefully, but it's a lot less than last year and a lot more less than 2 years ago. It's not because they become nice people. It's because they know that they are being watched, that this is important. They have to show restraint because of the process of TPP. Now, we have no illusions about this. They're not arresting people, but they're doing other things. They go to their homes, they beat them up sometimes. When I was there on my last day, we had a young man in Hanoi who was beaten up, and he put his pictures on Facebook, and we all saw that, and they condemned it. So that's bad. But at least I'm glad that fewer people are being sentenced to 5, 6, 10, 20 years in prison for doing that sort of thing. Sure? No, I can stand up. It's okay. So we have seen that, and what we are demanding, what we have to get in order to get TPP, in particular, is progress on labor rights. And very, very specifically, they're going to have to change their domestic law so that free, independent, local trade unions are allowed in Vietnam for the first time. And I want you to think about that. You know what a big deal that would be in a one-party communist state, to break the monopoly of the Communist Party on trade union organizing in Vietnam. And TPP will not enter into force until they have changed their law to do that. They can't just promise to do it. They have to change their law to do it first. And I don't know if they're going to do it. We don't have a deal yet. And the reason we don't have a deal is because this is hard, right? You can imagine what they're thinking. This is a big deal for them to do this. And I think they will do it in the end because TPP is an even bigger deal. They need it for all kinds of economic reasons and strategic reasons. But it's going to be down to the wire because what we are asking for is very, very meaningful. So that's where we are. And I got to tell you, when I was there this last time, and I had my usual arguments with the Vietnamese government about human rights, this time around the conversation was a little bit different because I was able to say, you know what, let's forget about our usual arguments. We're going to disagree philosophically about some things. It doesn't matter. You have to do this. And particularly when we were meeting, for example, with the Ministry of Public Security, they're not going to agree with me. But I said, you have to do this, because everything your government wants from the United States depends on you. And we need things from you not next year, but next week. Because this debate is going on in the US Senate this week, and it's going to be very, very close. So, this is where I come down on TPP. We have been talking about it for years. We now have to make a choice. And the only possible choices are, yes, let this process go forward, or no, stop it here. Our strategy is let it go forward. Let's try to get as much as we can from the Vietnamese on all these issues in the next few weeks in order to get the first step, which is TPA, Trade Promotion Authority, through the Senate and the House. Then we get a deal with Vietnam, I hope, with all these labor rights components in it. And then you send me back to Vietnam and Secretary Kerry and all of us back to try to get even more over the next few months before we send TPP to the Congress. Because remember, there's TPA and then there's TPP. So then we use that period to try to get everything we possibly can. And we make clear to them that even then, it doesn't enter into force until these changes. Oh, and by the way, then there are other things that they want from the United States. They want us to lift the ban on lethal weapon sales, which we've lifted 5% of. And so that enables us to be able to exert more leverage. So this is not an easy choice for many people. There are people in the Congress who care about human rights in Vietnam who are very skeptical about this. And I imagine some of you are skeptical as well. I can only tell you how I feel as the person who you send to Vietnam to bargain for improvements in human rights. This is the chance, and this is the tool. This is where we get our leverage. This is why they're listening to us right now. And I want to ride this as far as we possibly can. And I believe we can ride it to a point not where Vietnam is a democracy, but where we have gotten enough change in terms of legal change, people out of prison, so that Vietnamese civil society has enough power that they can then take it to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage. And so I ask you to think about this, because your voice is very important in this debate. People are going to listen to the Vietnamese American community, and they should listen to the Vietnamese American community because you know the country far better than any of us do. And so I want to ask you to weigh this choice and to think about what you are going to say to members of Congress who are going to be listening to you and looking to you for guidance. All I can tell you is how strongly I feel. This gives us not a guarantee, but a chance. And without it, I feel like I've got nothing. So that's where I am. I would love now to hear your questions, your views, your concerns. Ask whatever we want. We're off the record, so I'm going to be quite honest. And then we'll take it from there. I'm also eyeing that table very eagerly. So hopefully I will earn it. And oh no, do we do the questions after? Oh, I guess I've already earned it. Okay, so why don't we grab some food and then we'll come back here and we'll talk. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for I just recognize the presence of Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights and Labor, Mr. Scott Bushy. So please do.
We do. It's online. I don't know what
Mr. Secretary, I'm going to ask the first question. We were heartened to hear that in your delegation there was an official for the American Disability Act. And we are quite interested because we know that during the last 20 years, the United States has supported through USAID and also Health and Human Services the prosthetics and wheelchair program. But our relatives in Vietnam who were urban disabled veterans have never been able to get support from that. Could you comment on that? And if possible, could you get us the information about how many wheelchairs and prosthetics we have supported and whether the distribution, how it happened and the demographics of the recipient?
Thanks. On the demographics, I don't have the numbers in my head, so forgive me for that, but we will...
Louder, Tom.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't have the exact numbers, but we will try to get those for you, because I think that's a very important question. And yes, as you mentioned, Judy Heumann, who is our Ambassador at Large for Disability Rights, was with me on the trip. This is actually, I think, her second, maybe even second trip to Vietnam. So she's had her own separate dialogue with the Vietnamese government. As you know, Vietnam recently ratified the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. So they now have a legal obligation to do certain things, to provide access and opportunity for people with disabilities, not just the basic care, but making sure that they have equal access to buildings and to employment and to education. And Vietnam has a long way to go to provide that access. We found that even the Parliament building is not accessible to people with wheelchairs. And so we've tried to put some pressure on them to embarrass them that even some of the main public buildings in the country are not yet fully accessible. This is an issue that's actually a little bit easier to work on than some of the other issues we talked about, because the Communist Party of Vietnam could provide all of these things to disabled people without threatening its position in the country. So this is something that we should be able to make more progress on, and we're working on it very hard. And they now have a legal obligation because they signed the treaty. Thank you.
Now I'm going to read a question. What we were hearing from you sounds very familiar, because in 2006, when Vietnam was trying to enter the WTO, World Trade Organization, they were promising a lot in order to get the permanent normal trade relation from the United States. And after that, they carried out a crackdown on human rights and democracy activists, which Human Rights Watch at that time labeled the worst crackdown in 20 years. And as Dr. Quân mentioned, you were at Human Rights Watch at the time. How do you compare the situation then with the situation now, when Hanoi is looking at TPP, and what do we do in order to prevent the recurrence of that kind of blowing back on their words?
So what has changed? I don't want to exaggerate this. This is still a one-party communist state, and it's still capable of cracking down. And so I cannot promise that everything is going to be better this time. But here are some differences. Number one, TPP is very different from entry into the WTO. The argument I made was actually somewhat different from the argument that was being made at that time. The argument that was made then, and that you have heard many times before, is that trade is good for human rights. That if we bring countries like Vietnam and China into international trading arrangements, if there are more American companies, if there are more American investors, if they are more connected to us economically, if they are getting more contact with Americans, that naturally this will lead to better human rights. That was the argument then, and that is an argument that is kind of a leap of faith. It's asking you to trust that if we do this, maybe things will change later. That is not the argument I'm making. TPP is quite different, because we are asking for things up front. I'm not saying if they get into TPP, trust me, somehow this hidden hand of economics will change Vietnam. I'm saying they have to change their labor laws. Before this treaty enters into force, they have to allow independent trade unions before they get the benefits of TPP. And that's written into the treaty. And politically, we also know that they have to do more, because our Congress will probably not approve TPP unless they're showing restraint, unless there are fewer arrests, unless there are people released from prison. These are things that we have told them we need to see this year. And if all of this works out, as I said, we still do not have a guarantee. All I can tell you is that we can now bargain for things. We can now demand things and persuade people, even in the heart of the security apparatus in Vietnam, to deliver those things, because TPP is there. And if our Congress were to vote against TPA in the coming weeks, that would send a message that TPP is not there, that you don't have this prospect, you don't have this chance, and we would not be able to bargain for those things for the next year. So really what I'm asking for is a chance to keep bargaining for those things. I'm not even asking you to support TPP. I'm asking you to support TPA, because that will give us the chance for this process to keep going so that we have the bargaining power. And I promise you that we will use that bargaining power to get as much as we possibly can. That's all I can promise.
The next question is concerning the TPP. You are a diplomat, and the Obama administration will have a few more years, 2 more years. If after TPP is concluded and Hanoi does not carry out its promises of reforming the laws, making changes in their approaches, who will guarantee that those implementations are to be carried out? Because the track record, according to Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, is not very good, both for Republican and Democratic administration. Thank you.
Again, nobody can guarantee it. So I want to be very, very honest with you. The choice that we have to, the decision we have to make is, will we have a better chance if we go this way, or will we have a better chance if we go that way? You have to compare what you think the chances are of improvement if we keep moving along this road from TPA to TPP. You have to compare that to what you think the chances are if we stop that process. Now, if we continue, as I said, they actually do have to change their laws on some things before they get the benefits of membership in the treaty, especially on the labor side. There will have to be free and independent trade unions guaranteed by law in Vietnam. On some of the other issues, we are trying to get as many concessions as we can this year. Prisoners, criminal code, all those things that I mentioned. Now, if we get as far as I think we can, I guarantee you that next year and the year after, there will be people in the Vietnamese Communist Party and in the security apparatus who will resist. I guarantee you that they will break some of their promises. I'm not naive. But I believe we will be in a stronger position if we have this legally binding agreement on the table. If they break the terms of the agreement, we will be able to go to something called dispute resolution, where we can essentially sue them and force them legally to comply. It's not an easy process, but it is a process that the treaty allows us to go through. And I believe that if we have this period of 1 or 2 years in which they know that the spotlights are on them, just like the spotlights are on me right now, they are being watched, they are being questioned, and they have to, in this period, allow greater space, greater room for civil society. I believe at the end of that period, Vietnamese civil society will be stronger. They will have more legal protections, but they will also have more time to organize and get stronger, and they will then be joined, I hope, by a very strong labor movement. Now, here's something I don't say to them, but I will say to you. Remember the history of local, independent trade unions in communist countries. What was solidarity in Poland? And what broke the back of communist one-party rule in Eastern Europe? It was a trade union in one factory, and it wasn't even legal. In Vietnam, that will be legal through the TPP agreement. So just ask yourself, when you weigh this choice, will our chances be better if we go down this road, or will they be better if we don't go down this road? That's the question I ask myself.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. Peter Dow from Phú Nhuận.
Thank you, Mr. Malinowski. Thank you, Dr. Kwon. My name is Peter Dow, and I'm the editor of Phú Nhuận, Vietnamese newspaper. I have just one question. We have been told that while in Vietnam, you had a chance to meet with some civil society groups. So please tell us, during the conversation with those groups, did you just focus on the TPP process, or did you discuss with them on the situation of human rights in Vietnam in general? And what is your evaluation of their concern and their approach? Thank you.
99% of the conversation was on the situation of human rights in Vietnam. I explained to them where we are on TPP, and I took their questions, but no, I wanted to. The reason we meet with them is because we want to learn about what's going on in Vietnam, and they will tell us very honestly, because they have to live with it every single day. I think I don't want to speak for other people, and they can speak for themselves, and increasingly they do, and we can hear them. But I think that the general assessment is that things are better now than they were a year or 2 or 5 years ago. They have a little bit more space in which to operate, a lot more space online, on the internet. That is a very big change. But that it is very, very fragile. They still feel very much at risk. As I mentioned, even if there have been fewer arrests in the last year, fewer convictions, fewer people going to prison, they are still harassed, they are still threatened, sometimes subject to physical attack, and so they feel very vulnerable. One way to look at it is that there is a lot of free activity going on in Vietnam. As I mentioned in my speech, a lot of people are speaking freely. That doesn't mean they have freedom of speech. A lot of people are associating freely. That doesn't mean that they have freedom of association. So there's a lot of energy and activism in civil society. People are pushing out to test the boundaries, but they feel very, very vulnerable. And that's what has to change. That's why we need not just changes in the behavior of the government, we need legal changes. We need these changes to be made permanent in law, and that's what we are encouraging.
One more question on the potential of legal reform. There is a saying in the Vietnamese community that Vietnam has a jungle of laws, but they only use the law of the jungle. So even though we are promised that they are going to change the laws with respect to public security behavior, with association, but the enforcement of the law is the main problem. Not that they don't have laws, but they don't enforce the law according to our perspective. Can you comment on that?
I think both parts are important. You need to have good laws, and then you need to work on ensuring that those laws are enforced. But I do think the first part is important. When I sit down with the Vietnamese government, especially with the public security ministry, and we talk about people who are in prison. What is their answer? They say they broke the law. And you know what? It's true, they did break the law. Because the law in Vietnam criminalizes abusing your democratic freedoms to undermine the interests of the state. That's Article 258 of the Criminal Code. It criminalizes undermining the unity policy and making propaganda against the government. And so under the law, the Ministry of Public Security can arrest you for those things. And when I have that argument with them in 3 years, I want the law on my side. I don't want the law on their side. Now, if the law is on my side, I will probably still have an argument, because you're right that implementation is the next big challenge. But I do think that the letter of the law does mean something to them, because it gives them the ability to say, what we are doing is legitimate. What we are doing is in accordance with our law. You can't tell us to break our own law. So that is the first step. But you're absolutely right, it is only the first step, and then we will have to work on the second step, the third step.
Next, we would like to have Mr. Kuvi Havu for the next question.
First of all, I would like to offer my greatest thanks to Secretary Tom Malinowski, as well as your team members, Scott Bushy and Brian Fioresi, the wonderful team for democratization in Vietnam. And I must say that until now we have nearly 20 dialogues on human rights with Vietnam. But with Tom Malinowski arrival in the State Department, yeah, myself, I told that there are tremendous changes in American position, yeah, about human rights in Vietnam. And I myself, as a prisoner of conscience, yeah, I thank you very much. Thank you for American intervention. Thank you for your personal efforts. Now I am here to continue my democracy, my struggle for democracy and human rights in Vietnam. And and I realize that with your work, very positive work for human rights in Vietnam, I saw that from last year, for the first time, American government had to commit about reform, legal to take legal reforms in Vietnam. For example, to eliminate repressive laws in Vietnam. And this year, yeah, you have clearly had the tongue with Vietnamese delegation. And that's the first point, very positive, I realized. And the second thing you achieved in Vietnam, that was the first time you consider Vietnamese government in very equal base with civil society in Vietnam. You conducted civil society activists, and I appreciate that. Now in Vietnam, although there exists one party rule, but with your contact directly with civil society organization activists, so we can see that now we Vietnamese Communist government is not that stop to be the only partner, only subject to discuss with American government. And my question is very brief. I want to know that in the coming visit of Secretary General of Communist Party Vietnam, Nguyễn Phú Trọng, to the United States, I don't know if President Barack Obama will ask Nguyễn Phú Trọng the same thing you did ask to Vietnamese government delegation recently. Thank you.
Thank you. And first, let me say it is always good to see you here. I would much rather see you in Vietnam. So we were talking about step 1, step 2. You know, when the Vietnamese government releases a prisoner of conscience and forces them to leave their country, that is half a step. That's not even one step in my book. So this is something that I consider to be unfinished business. We want to make sure that everybody can be where they want to be. The short answer to your short question is yes. It will be, President Obama will ask the very same things that I was asking. This is not just coming from me. This is everybody in our government. And we are doing it because it's the right thing to do and because we have to. Because we understand that all of the things that we want to achieve in our relationship with Vietnam, especially this year, depend on more progress on human rights. And so we will continue to make that absolutely clear. And, you know, I think all in all, it is a good thing that the General Secretary is coming here to hear that message. We want him to be comfortable with this process. We want him not to be afraid of change. We want him to feel that this change can come and that the Communist Party can be part of it somehow, that it will not be just left behind in the dustbin of history. Because if they are afraid, then they won't let it happen. So that's the point of this visit, that he will hear exactly the same message on prisoners, on legal reform, on freedom of expression, internet freedom, freedom of religion, that everyone in the government has heard from me and Secretary Kerry and from others.
One more.
One more very brief question. As we know, recently we realized many changes between Cuba and the United States. And for normalization, diplomatic relation between two countries, Cuba had to release a great number of prisoner of conscience. And my question is, American government can do the same thing with Cuban government. That means that Vietnamese communist government has to release all political prisoners or prisoners of conscience before they can join FTP, TPP. Thank you.
We have been absolutely clear with the government of Vietnam that we want them to release all prisoners of conscience. Now, in the Cuba case, it was actually not a strict quid pro quo. It looked that way, perhaps. But had we said to the Cubans, we will normalize relations, but only if you release all prisoners of conscience, it wouldn't have happened. It was actually much more subtle than that. They understood that we expected progress on that issue, and we moved forward with normalization, and both of those things happened simultaneously. In diplomacy, you sometimes have to be a little bit more subtle. In the case of Vietnam, we will continue to push for the release of all prisoners of conscience. And as I mentioned to you, this is a step-by-step process. So this trade agreement is not one day you don't have it and the next day you have it. The first step is TPA, the Trade Promotion Authority. We'll try to get as much as we can. The next step, which will take several more months probably, is the TPP itself, and then getting that through our Congress. Then it doesn't necessarily enter into force legally for Vietnam on the day that our Congress approves it. So there may be more things that have to happen for the treaty to enter into force. Then, let's say we've gone through all of those steps, there are still many more things that the government of Vietnam wants from us, including the security relationship, lifting of the ban on lethal arms sales. So I believe our strategy is to try to get as much as we can at each of these stages. We have to ask ourselves, how much can we ask for? I think we would all agree that if we asked for an end to one-party communist rule in Vietnam as a condition of joining TPP, they would say, go to hell. And we'd have no TPP and no progress on human rights. So that's one extreme. We don't want to ask for too much. We also don't want to ask for too little. We want to find exactly that point where we've asked for something that is very hard for them to do, but they are still politically willing to do in order to get to the next stage. And then we have to do it again. And then we have to do it again. And so these are the judgments that we are trying to make. And not everyone is going to agree with us, I'm sure, at each stage that we are making the right judgment. But we are sincerely trying to find that perfect middle where we think we can actually get something, get them to do something that will make us better off. And then we will do it again, and then we will do it again. So that's our thinking.
Thank you so much.
I believe that we don't have enough time, and the secretary still have to answer. We have 3 official interviews with UA, RFA, and SPTN. So please stay and relax, get some coffee, and we will invite the Deputy Adjutant Secretary to hold the file to Secretary Malinowski to review inside.
Thank you. Thank you all again. Those were the right questions. Thank you. I hope that this was helpful. And please know that this conversation does not end tonight. You can always reach out to us if there are more questions, if there are things that you are concerned about, if there are issues that you think we should be raising with the Vietnamese government that we are not. Please let us know. And again, I just want to ask you, please take part in this debate. Whether you agree with me or disagree with me, we need to hear the voice of the Vietnamese American community in this debate right now, because this is when it really matters. Thank you.
Here again, Dr. Kwan's backyard, having some nice Vietnamese food. It's always a pleasure to come here and meet with you and see all of you. As I said, a little bit louder, I'll speak a little bit more. As I said to Dr. Kwan, and many of you who were here the last time I came, I grew up with several Vietnamese refugees really as part of my family. And so meeting all of you and being here and getting the privilege to work on issues relating to Vietnam about human rights, democracy, is really a great pleasure for me. I was not able to join Tom for the Human Rights Dialogue because someone needed to stay home and mind the store. So I stayed home and answered questions on TPP and other issues. Nor am I as articulate as Tom is. As you can tell, Tom is a very thoughtful, articulate person. But if you have more questions that Tom didn't answer, I'd be happy to address them. Let me just say, as Tom did, that we will continue to be very, very engaged with the Vietnamese American community, with civil society organizations like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Reporters Without Borders, as we continue to decide what our policies are towards Vietnam on human rights. So if any of you have additional questions or comments, I'd be happy to hear them.
I don't have a question, but I'm really enjoying your talking. And good luck to you, and I hope you bring human rights to Vietnam. Thank you very much, and I hope you come back with us soon. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions?
Okay, thank you.
Directed to Mr. Bushy. Okay. Please come on.
I have a very good question here. You know the relationship between China and Vietnam. They are very close, very tight connection. So when we ask them to change any law, to favor trade union, for example, so they did what, right? The Vietnamese government will say, by the Chinese. So is there any possibility, any freedom for them to do anything they want, or they got concern with the Chinese about what they may be doing? Just want your thought about that, not any policy change or anything like that.
Well, the relationship between China and Vietnam is, of course, a very complicated one. And Vietnam, for much of its history, of course, has lived in the shadow of China, if not having been actually ruled by China. And I think one of the things going on right now with Vietnam is they're quite concerned about China's aggressive behavior in the South China Sea. And I think Vietnam is looking for some new friends who can perhaps help protect it a little bit more against China. Yes, China and Vietnam are still close. Yes, they still have share lots of information. Yes, there are great similarities between the one-party system in China and the one-party system in Vietnam. But I think Vietnam is looking for a little bit more independence, looking for protection, as I said, looking for help. And that is another factor, I think, that we in the United States can use to encourage Vietnam to make progress on human rights in other areas. So Tom mentioned the lethal weapons ban. I think the Vietnamese government wants this ban to be lifted both for symbolic reasons, to show that the relationship with the United States is a fully normal relationship, but I think they actually are hoping to get things from the United States that they can't get from any other country, and that could help them perhaps defend themselves against China if China continues with its aggressive behavior. So the relationship with China right now, yes, is very much in the Vietnamese mind. It's a close relationship, but it is a complicated relationship, and I think it's a relationship that's changing.
Mr. Bushy, in the 12 countries of the TPP, Vietnam is the only communist country. So there is a perception that the United States is enlisting Vietnam in its geopolitical strategy vis-a-vis China. Because if it is only economic interest that we are looking at the TPP, it doesn't say the whole story. And that is the perception from many, many people, including some Vietnamese Americans. Can you address that aspect?
Well, that's a complicated question, and I was not around when the decision was made to include Vietnam in TPP. But I think it was partly driven by the fact that Vietnam has made a number of economic changes in the past 20 years. I think it was influenced by the fact of China's dominance in the region and the opportunity that TPP presents to perhaps bring Vietnam more into the U.S. orbit. So I think these are some of the factors affecting the decision to invite Vietnam to join TPP. I should say that Vietnam is not the only country being considered for TPP that has human rights challenges. As you may know, Brunei, a very small country, but a Muslim country which has recently adopted Sharia law, has also been the subject of great criticism and controversy about its joining TPP. So there are many people, both women, gay people, who are saying that it would be inappropriate for Brunei to join TPP. And there are people who are saying the same thing about Malaysia. Malaysia, as you may know, is a Tier 3 country in terms of its trafficking in persons policies, its record. And Senator Menendez, among others, has said we shouldn't have countries in Tier 3 participate in the TPP agreement. And we are making very similar arguments. We, Tom, myself, the administration on these other countries too that we're making with Vietnam is that TPA and TPP presents us with opportunities to try to negotiate changes to these bad human rights policies in these countries. So Vietnam is not alone in terms of being in the public spotlight here in the TPP debate because of its human rights record. Brunei, Malaysia are too, and I think there are similar arguments, similar ideas that are being debated.
Good evening. First of all, I would like to be advised as to how to say your name the right way. Is it Busby or Bushby? Busby. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, now I have two questions. Either TPA or TPP would become realized in the near future for Vietnam. I certainly hope that it doesn't have the repetition of what TWO had happened. because with the communists, they are very good in their talking. They would agree to anything just to get their way, and then to follow it or not. That would be another thing once things is done. That is one thing. And the other thing is that we seem to crawl along a tunnel. And this evening, through the talk, I have the feeling like you have said, or Mr. Tom has said, that there would be a light at the end of the tunnel. And we have been crawling through that tunnel for 40 years now. So how long more? How further the tunnel that we have to crawl to reach to the light? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I've already forgotten your first question, but I'll come back to it in a second. Let me talk about the light at the end of the tunnel. I don't think Tom or I or the Obama administration would say that TPP is going to bring us to the light at the end of the tunnel. But I think what Tom did say earlier, and what I would say, that it gives us the possibility of making progress in that tunnel. I do remember your first question now, which is about the fact that the Communist Party will agree to anything to get what it wants. But unlike with the WTO, here Vietnam, the government of Vietnam, the Communist Party, has to agree to allow independent trade union activity at the local level. So they're having to make legal changes, institutional changes. They're having to decide that the official union of the Communist Party is not the only union that can exist in the country. And these have been big decisions for them. There have been many, many hours of negotiation around these issues because they are such fundamental changes to Vietnamese law and to the way in which the Communist Party does business. So they're going to have to agree to these things. And we will then have an opportunity to evaluate whether they are really doing those things. Even if they adopt a good law permitting independent trade union activity, we will have to evaluate whether they're abiding by that law. And as Tom said earlier, if we feel that they are not abiding by the commitments they made under TPP, then we can file an action appealing for a review of Vietnamese participation in TPP because they're not living up to their side of the agreement. So we feel like TPP gives us a little more leverage than we had with the WTO deal. It's not perfect. We're not saying that it is the light at the end of the tunnel. But we feel it gives us some tools to make a little more progress in the tunnel, perhaps. And that's why we're arguing for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? Any question?
Well, thank you again for coming. Thank you, Dr. Quan, for bringing us together. This has been a delightful evening, and we'll look forward to continuing the conversation with you.